Hi there, we're going to try something a little bit unusual and out of the ordinary today. I've got here a silver box. Inside of the silver box is something equally out of the ordinary. It is a card box. Of course, that's not out of the ordinary at all for this YouTube channel. Inside of it we have a deck of cards, something that we deal with frequently in our magic channel here. What I want to do is very simple. We're going to take this deck, which is actually shuffled and randomized. There's no duplicates in here. It's a completely shuffled deck. We need to make a selection. Now, the big hang-up here is that you are not here with me. So in order to do a random selection, what I need to do is cut the deck. And whatever card we end up with is the one that we'll use. So I'll just cut into the deck here, and we'll take this one, which is the Five of Diamonds. So the Five of Diamonds is the card that we will work with going forward. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this card here. What we're going to do is we're going to take this card, and I want to compare it to another card that you've seen sitting in plain sight the entire time. I have here a card that's been sitting in this glass, and this card here represents our selection. It is a prediction, a very ordinary plot that we've seen before. So from all of the cards that we selected, this is the one that we settled on. And here I've got a card that should, if things go properly, should match our selection. Now I just want to prepare you a little bit. This card is an exact a match, but it might be a little bit unusual, and you might consider this cheating. If you take a look at it, what it is actually a joker. Now I know what you're thinking. This is serious cheating going on here, but it's true. If you've played certain card games before, you'll know that a joker can stand in as what we call a wild card. And a wild card, of course, can represent any card in the deck. So in a sense, really any card that we selected could have matched my prediction here. But I really don't want you to focus on the fact that it's a joker. Actually, what I want you to take a look at is the back of the card, the back of our selection. You see here that on the back of the selection, we have a particular pattern. You see this pattern going on here, which is a very good match to our prediction. Now, I know what you're thinking now is, well, this doesn't make sense because all of the cards have that same pattern on the back. Well, I want to make you aware that sometimes things are not always as they appear to be. And you can see here that we have an exact match in our prediction. Not only in that way, but again, I want to remind you that not everything may be as it seems at first.
This is going to be a very different kind of tutorial. We're actually going to have a theoretical discussion here that can affect magic in a greater sense, your illusions that you do in a much greater sense than this one particular effect that we're going to talk about. The fact of the matter is that once you've seen the effect that I just showed you one time, if you go back and watch it again, you will be able to sort it out. I almost guarantee it. What I want to talk about is the creation of an effect. It's one thing to learn magical effects, illusions from people, and then practice them and replicate them. It's another thing to purchase effects as such and practice them and replicate them. But then it's another thing entirely to create your own and make your own effects. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The way to think through the types of effects that there are and the methods that exist to create those effects and coming up with one on your own. We're going to kind of sort through the one that we just saw here and talk maybe about some other ideas as well. So the first thing I want to do here is we're going to look at a list that I put together. This is a list of effects. Now actually there's a number of lists that are out there that have been published in many different books. And a lot of different people say a number of different things about the types of effects that exist. You'll find lists ranging from 7 major basic effects to 20 major basic effects. And really the difference between those lists and the types of effects that there are come down to one author splitting up other subtypes, or rather other types into subtypes. I've come up with my own list, and this is actually put together from a lot of other people, and I've taken even some of the words exactly, put them together here. But I've organized this in a way that seems simple to me. And I want to share it with you here, and I might even upload these documents for you to download if you would like to reference them as well. But first, let's talk about effects. In my mind, there are really two types of feats, impossible feats, and I've kind of categorized effects in this way. There's impossible feats with objects, and then there's impossible feats with information. So the two different kinds of magical effects that you can deal with, one deals with objects and another one can deal really just with information. They need not involve any kind of change or movement of an object. It's really just the information about something or about somebody or about a circumstance that you're dealing with. And you can sort of see that one side is dealing with material illusions, and then the other side is dealing more so with mentalism, and you'll see how this is broken up. So let's look at the first category first, impossible feats with objects. Again, this is what I call these two divisions. This is something that I reason through in my own mind. In this category, I see that there's two subcategories. There are what I refer to as material effects, and then there's animation effects. Now, the reason why I have these different is that it seems to me that there's kind of one category where you have things that are material, things that are physical, that are there, objects, that will change in some way. They either go from non-existence to existence, or vice versa, the other way around, or they are moving or animating, or they are changing in some way. They're becoming something else, or dividing out or condensing down. You're taking a material and you're doing something with it that is changing the material in some way. So to materialize, dematerialize, or to change. Then there are, I think, another category, this section B down here, called animation effects. Now, animation effects would be when you take something that is a material object and it moves in a magical way. So something is moving without the aid of any kind of physical interaction, or it is animating in some way. So let's look at these subcategories then a little bit further. So under material effects, I've got 6 different kinds that I've written down here. Again, a lot of this is borrowed from thinking that other people have done. Just I've recategorized it in a way that seems logical to me. The first one is productions and appearances. Productions and appearances. And under that I have a little sub-bullet called multiplication. Because when you multiply something, I'm thinking of like, the little foam rabbits or sponge balls or something like that. When you're multiplying something, it's really a production. It's really an appearance. A multiplication of something is the appearance of additional duplications of it. So that's number 1. 2 would be the opposite, would be disappearances, vanishes, when you're taking something and it is going away. It was there and then it is not, and it's unknown where it went. It seemed to have vanished. The third one is transpositions, or when things are trading spaces with each other. So you may have one person holding on to one card and you have another card and they're turned face down, and then when they're turned over they have switched places. Transposition. So one thing goes to another and they switch places. Transformations is a little bit different from a transposition. That's when you have one thing that is turning into something else. So that's when you have one card and you're only dealing with one card, but it turns into a different card, like a color change would be kind of a transformation effect when you're thinking about cards. Penetrations or escapes. Now, I kind of put these together. Some people would talk about escapes separately, but it seems to me that most escapes, the vast majority, if not really all within reason, variations of escapes are penetrations of some sort. That is, that there's something that is binding and the bounds are being broken or being materialized through in order to grant escape. So penetrations and escapes I kind of put together in the same sort of category. And often they function the same way too, which is why I put them together. We'll talk about methods in a minute. This is a list of effects. And then the last one is restorations, and this is some terminology I borrowed from a couple of other lists, is invulnerability, and that is kind of the same thing, and that is an indestructibility or an ability to avoid harm, which is slightly different than a restoration, but they kind of go together. So a restoration obviously would be something like a torn and restored card. Invulnerability or indestructibility would be something that can't be broken. And I'm at a loss to think of an example of that, but I know that there are effects that are like that, where something just can't be harmed in any way, no matter how it's dealt with. So those are the basic material effects that I can sort out. You might be able to think of some others, but I've tried to be pretty comprehensive with this. The section B here, animation effects, I've broken up into these subcategories. One is mind over matter versus spirit effects. And I kind of put these together because they're really the same thing. You're just making a different claim as to the cause of the action. So mind over matter would be something like Jedi mind tricks, right? Moving an object from here to there with the power of the mind. Versus a spirit effect, which is something, it's really the same effect. It's just that the pattern, the underlying discussion is different. It's spiritualism. That is that a ghost or a spirit is causing something to move, like what you would find in a seance kind of environment. 2, sympathetic reaction. Sympathetic reaction. That is making an object do the same thing as another object. So in terms of cards, it could be a do as I do sort of a routine, would be similar to an animation effect. And sympathetic reaction, but more specifically, it would be more like the voodoo doll sort of scenario, right? Where you're taking one thing and you're making it move, but something else that is not being dealt with is doing the same thing or something similar to it. Number 3, levitation and suspension is when you're taking an object and it is being animated such that it's not necessarily moving, but it is being maintained in a position that is unnatural and impossible. So levitating an object or suspending it without the appearance and the apparent existence of supports. And number 4, attraction. Mysterious adhesion is a terminology I saw in another list. So that is when things are sticking together sort of magnetically, which is very similar to a levitation, except that there is a contact and an apparent support. It's just that the support is illogical. It doesn't seem possible. The old school trick where you take a wand, a magic wand, or the dinner table trick where you put a butter knife in your hand and you open your hand and the knife is sticking to your hand, if you've ever seen that little kid's trick before. So these are the various types of material effects that I can think of. So we have material effects that are materializing, dematerializing, transpositions, transformations, penetrations, restorations. And then you have animation effects where you're taking material and it is moving without any apparent cause. The second category, impossible feats with information. So we have mentalism effects. These very quickly would be made up of divination, or mentally locating an object, knowing where something is at without seeing it. Verifying it without seeing it. 2 would be identifications of objects that are not seen. So that is somebody is known to have an object, but with one's back turned, they know what object they're holding. Very kind of old school element in mentalism. Number 3, thought reading is what you really think about when you think of mentalism, and transference. So I kind of put these two together because in one sense is you're apparently taking the thoughts of somebody else without them giving it to you. And then in the other is the idea that you're transferring thoughts to somebody else. And there are ways to kind of portray that. And then number 4, prediction, foretelling a future action or situation. So to predict that something is going to happen with some kind of preordained indication. Number 5, mental agility, memorization or lightning calculation. Now, this is a very interesting category because memorization and lightning calculation can be real feats. They don't have to be illusions. However, I tend to favor the illusion kind of side of that because, quite frankly, my memorization and lightning calculation ability is pretty poor. So there are people that do memorization feats, and they're really doing it. And they do lightning calculations, and they're really doing it. But if we're thinking about it in terms of an illusion, this can be faked through some sorts of methods. Number 6, hypnotism. and that is mentally causing changes in the actions or experience of others. This is the one that seems a little bit more like a material effect, but typically you're dealing with people. And when you're dealing with people and you're dealing with people doing things that apparently are outside of their will or interest, you're dealing with hypnotism. So causing changes in the actions or experience of others. That is to say that somebody is experiencing something differently than what the other spectators are viewing or seeing or also experiencing. So these are the various types of effects that exist. I think it's fairly comprehensive. Again, you might find some other examples. So you might break this down a little bit differently, but this is how I think about it, these different types of effects. Now again, why is it important to think about this? Well, if you want to create an effect or you want to understand an effect, or another exercise is to go on to, you can even try this maybe today, go on to an online magic store and read the descriptions of various effects and think for yourself, how might you accomplish that general same effect through your own methodology? That's a good exercise. Just read the description of the trick and then try to find a way to accomplish that description without actually knowing what's being sold. This is a way to do it, is first understand the types of effects. Now this has a second list. The second list is the methods. Now this is a correlation to the first list. It's broken up in the same way, and it lists out essentially all of the ways, to the best of my understanding, that those effects can be accomplished. So these correlate. So we have impossible feats with objects. We have material effects and animation effects. For material effects, this can be accomplished. These various effects can be accomplished with secret compartment or hidden storage. Now, by the way, this may be something that is gimmicked, such as a particular box that is manufactured in such a way that it has a hidden compartment. However, I want to impress on you that need not be true. I've always been amazed going into magic shops, especially the really good ones that have a lot of really great things to look at. I like going into magic shops that have good things to look at, not just good tricks to sell, but things that look interesting, you know, different kinds of antique-y sorts of pieces sitting on the walls. And you just wonder, what is that thing and what does it do? And more often than not, you'll see cups and vessels and boxes and plates and various kinds of things up there. And the assumption you always have when you look at that is that there's some kind of trick to them. However, I want to encourage you to think that perhaps most of those things have no trick to them. You could go to an antique store, or you could go to a Salvation Army or some kind of thrift store, buy, you know, small, used, interesting-looking pieces and use them as they are without modification, just for the purpose of a trick. And we're actually going to talk about that in our example here. But just using something as good misdirection, something that's interesting, that helps you accomplish a trick, is a good way to think about this concept of secret compartment hidden storage. So you might use something as a misdirection to move something somewhere else. It might not necessarily have to be gimmicked in any way. 2, substitution or decoy. That is something that is standing in for something else while the something else is being dealt with. So this is really good when you look at those kinds of tricks where you borrow a watch and seem to destroy it, right, and then it is restored later on. So we'll, you know, that kind of fits into the restored object kind of scenario. Or something that is moving to another place or being concealed in a box that is locked, and it seems to happen very quickly. You would want to put in a substitution or a decoy in order to accomplish that. Compressible materials, that is something that is able to compress down into a smaller size in order to fit in places. Pulls, these are things that can be attached to objects, usually small objects, and can pull them, usually through elasticity or a reel. into a location for concealment, like into a jacket. The use of cover. This just means that you put something over top of the object while you're dealing with it, such as you would have an object sitting on the table and you would place a handkerchief over it before it disappears. And actually just the use of cover alone can be enough to get rid of it, to allow you to do the work you need to do. Misdirection, or the unexpected effect. I put these two things together. Misdirection is pretty logical, because almost all magic deals with misdirection. That is the placing of direction or attention on something else while an important event is happening. The unexpected effect. This is a big favorite of mine, and we're actually going to deal with this in a moment. That is the situation where something unexpected happens, and that ends up being the magical scenario. So it's like saying you're going to do one thing, but you do something else that might be bigger or better, but it's just something else. It was unexpected. And the very fact that it was unexpected means that you could much more easily prepare for it to happen right in front of the spectator. A very good technique. Hidden breaks or openings. Hidden breaks are when you have something that should be solid, but it has a break in it. A big spoiler alert here, you know, the linking rings, okay? You know, you're dealing with hidden breaks there. So the objects are not actually fully connected, but there's a break in there somewhere that is being concealed and hidden away through various kinds of motions and presentation. This is very important when dealing with escapes. And hidden breaks might not be apparent and just hidden by cover. Hidden breaks might be something that has a jimmied lock, such as handcuffs that are able to be broken open through some other means other than the key. There is a hidden break in there that allows it to come apart. Proofs via subtlety. So this is a really interesting idea. That is something that you can think about it like this. I could say that I have two cards, or sorry, I could turn over a card on the deck, and I could say, I have one card here, and I could flick it, and I could give it to a spectator, right? And they can touch it. And I'm proving very overtly that I have one card. That's a proof. However, I can also do the same thing with subtlety. I can just turn the card over without talking about the fact that I have one card, and I can flick it one time, or I could do something with it to make it apparent that it's one card, even if it isn't. But I've given a subtlety rather than a proof, and the subtlety acts as a proof. So there are certain tricks where you give very overt proofs. There are other tricks where you give subtleties, and you don't really pay great attention, especially in coin magic, hand and coin magic, where you're making coins disappear in the hands. Those kinds of routines usually deal a great deal on subtlety. There are some moments where you will do proofs, and you show that hands are completely empty. There are other times when you use subtlety. You don't overtly show that a hand is empty, but you subtly do something that would indicate to the spectator that a hand is empty when in fact it is not. Okay, so proofs via subtlety. Animation effects. Invisible line, obviously. Substitutions or decoys, that is where you take something that is lighter than something else and you substitute it in and it has some kind of rigging to it. Magnetic force, temporary adhesive or latch, obviously for things that are adhesive. Obstructed supports, so that is the situation where something is suspended and there doesn't appear to be a support, but that's because the support is actually obstructed from the spectator's view in some elaborate way. So the lady is floating in front of the illusionist. I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't say lady. This is 2018 after all. A person is floating in front of the illusionist, and the support that is holding up that individual is being concealed by the actual body of the person performing the illusion. It is going around them. There's a gooseneck. What they might call that sort of support. Proofs with hidden breaks and openings and false perspective. So proofs with hidden breaks, that is where you have something that is suspended and you take a ring and you pass it over it and the ring has a hidden break in it. That could be done so that it can go around the support. Openings is another way of saying that. False perspective. This is a very, very good way to do proofs in suspension effects. That is where you take a ring and you go around the object and it appears that you have gone all the way around it when in fact you have not. You've actually gone around the object, but you did not go through the support. You actually avoided the supporting structure and made it appear as though nothing is holding up that suspended object. Next one here, impossible feats with information. I know this is kind of a tedious discussion here, but it's very important to what we're going to be doing. Impossible feats with information. Mentalism effects, you could have a confederate. That is someone who's helping you. I hate to break it to you, but there are a lot of versions of the any card at any number. The most spectacular versions often are done with a confederate. That is the best way to do that trick, is that one person is in on it. Gambling routines can be done with the confederate. Gambling, cheating in general is often done with a confederate. But you have somebody that's helping you out. This also refers to stagehands, people that are around you. You might say that I have been nowhere near that piece of paper, that we wrote something down on, some piece of information. But maybe a stagehand or an associate has been near it. Well, that's as good as you being near it, because if they can get the information, then the information can then be gotten to you. So the use of someone helping you out. 2, a signal or a receiver transmitter or peaking. That is the simple idea of having information sent to you via electronics or through some other kinds of signal. Or you are peeking something, such as in the case with cards, you could be peeking information and getting a look at information when you apparently otherwise shouldn't be able to. Forces or equivoque in substitution is self-explanatory. Mentalism effects often require all of those. Equivoque is whenever you're saying something that can have more than one meaning, although it apparently only has one meaning. That is to say, please select something. And just the fact that somebody selected one of two things doesn't necessarily indicate what you're going to do with it. Now, if you said, please take something, that is not equivoque. Someone would be taking one thing to themselves. If you say, please select something, then whatever they select, you can choose to keep or you can choose to give to them. And that is equivoque, the best example of it, easiest example of it. Time reversal. Almost all predictions are time reversal. I've heard a number of people say that. False presentation of an order of operations, like being one ahead. So time reversal is to say, I have a prediction here, and my prediction is written down ahead of time. That's what makes it a prediction. However, the prediction isn't shown until after the trick is done. That is almost always an example of time reversal, and what that usually involves is that if something really was a free selection, the prediction is withheld not because it is accurate, but because it's not accurate, and you need to substitute in your prediction once you get information on the true selection. So you're reversing time, really, in order to accomplish the end goal. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Memorization, that is the preparation or the research that is involved in mentalism. So in the most elaborate form of this, if I had a sold audience, an audience where tickets were being sold, and those tickets were being sold by seat number, I could know that within a certain group of seats that are bought, that a certain person paid with a credit card. And with that credit card information, I would have an identity. And with an identity, I can do research. And if I know something about that person, where they live, interesting things about the town that they live in, if I was being really creepy, I could even go find the house that they're living in ahead of time. And people do things like this. If you really want a good trick, you'll do anything you need to do it. But research can really be useful in mentalism effects. It requires a lot of preparation ahead of time so that you can divulge information that you shouldn't otherwise be able to have. Number 6, misdirection or the unexpected effect. This is the same thing that we talked about in material effects. It can also be applied to mentalism. Opportunity, chance, and multiple outs. This is my favorite thing. I wish I would take more advantage of it than I do. But I've heard a number of really great illusionists, particularly card magicians, talk about the idea of using multiple outs and taking chances, taking advantage of opportunities. I actually did this the other day. I was doing a trick for somebody, and it was going to be a counting trick. and I had the card that was to be selected on top of the deck. And I was hoping they were going to select something with a large number, a word that has a lot of numbers in it that I could spell out at least 5 or 6, right? And instead they gave me 2. So I had to count to 2. And I didn't really have a good way to deal down artificially to 2 the way I wanted to do it. So I actually had a moment there where after that person said 2, they were distracted by something else. And I just noticed the distraction. And rather than trying to get their attention back, I just started dealing, and I did a second deal of the second card, and then I dealt the top card on top, and I changed the way I was going to do the effect. I took advantage of an opportunity to get away with something. You should be doing that. You should be taking opportunities. You really ought to be able to make magic effects in the moment, wherever you're at with anything you have, by taking advantage of opportunities, especially with kids. Kids are easily persuaded through opportunity and chance. So that's a really good way to think about effects. Not just mentalism, but also material effects too. Spectator compliance to suggestion. This is dealing with hypnotism. I don't do any of this stuff, but just in short, hypnotism almost always functions on this concept of spectator compliance to suggestion. It is not really that you are learning a skill to cause someone to do something apart from their will. What you're actually doing is you are getting them to be willful in compliance to your suggestion. So you're really not making people do things they don't want to do. Mentalism is about making people do things they want to do for the purposes of entertainment. It's the best way I know to explain it. Spectator alternative experience. Including material substitution. So this is a situation where you're getting someone to experience something differently than what the audience is seeing. There are different ways to do that. Another way to look at this, though, the spectator alternative experience, is you can think about the timing of events for the audience being different than the timing of events for an active spectator, someone that's helping you with something. So if someone's sitting on stage, I mean, the best example of this would be like the paper balls over the head thing, right? Is an alternative experience. The audience is experiencing one thing, the spectator is experiencing something else. And hopefully you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look that up online, disappearing balls over the head. You'll find various versions of that. Anyway, these are all the different methods. Let's make a trick. Okay, let's make a trick now. Now, hopefully this discussion isn't too tedious and you're finding it interesting. I really think it's worth it to examine these things. We're going to make an effect, and I've already predetermined this. We've already seen the effect, but this is the effect that I decided on. And I actually decided on these elements before I decided on the effect. I made a few alterations to my list once the effect started to get put together. But essentially what I wanted to do is I wanted to do a transformation. You can see in my impossible feats with objects, I settled on transformation. I wanted to transform something into something else. That was the effect I wanted to do. Okay, so I also have down here a number of things under impossible feats with information, and they're in red because these are kind of secondary things that are happening in the effect. Ultimately, this is the effect I want to do, a transformation, but these are secondary things that I am also doing in the trick. First thing is that I'm doing an identification of objects unseen. I have a prediction. Okay, I have a prediction in there, and the prediction is even going to pay out. Now, that prediction is going to be done via a transformation, which is the real effect that I'm doing, but I do have that. Thought reading or transference of ideas. Mentally reading or projecting another's thoughts. This is done, again, through that prediction. And then also down here, prediction outright. Foretelling a future action or situation. So these are in red because they're very secondary to the effect. Okay, this really isn't a mentalism trick. It's actually a material trick. It's a transformation, but these are secondary things that are happening as part of the trick. Methods. Let's talk about the methods for this. Secret compartment, hidden storage, substitution, and decoy. So if I'm going to change something, I'm going to have to substitute it in. with the thing I'm changing it with. I'm going to have to hide things in different places, so there's no way to get around that. I put these in red down here because these are the favored ways that I'm going to pull this off. 6, a misdirection and the unexpected effect. I love this. This is really the best way to do something really elaborate that requires a lot of monkeying around, is to make the effect unexpected. That way you can do your monkeying around and people don't realize that you're doing it. Okay? So the actual transformation I'm going to be doing isn't going to be apparent. At the beginning of the trick, as you remember, I said that it was a prediction trick. But the real trick was that it was going to be a transformation. So there was a misdirection in that the actual effect was unexpected and it wasn't overtly shared. Proofs via subtlety. I have a lot of this going on. I do subtle things in the movement of objects that you'll see when I demonstrate it that give proofs, but they're subtle, such that the deck is always in view when it really isn't. It apparently is in view with the way I move things around, as you'll see later, but actually the deck is not always in view. I'm able to switch it out. The card that changes seemingly to always be in view, but it isn't. There's subtleties built in that make it appear as though things are on the up and up when they really are not, without overtly saying, watch the deck. The deck will be in view the entire time. Okay, if I want to do an unexpected effect, I don't want to be saying that. I want to be just using subtlety as my proofs. Impossible feats with information, the methods down here. I'm going to use a little bit of force, equivoque, and substitution. Obviously, we're using a force in there. There really is no other way to do the trick that we're doing without a force. I'm just going to tell you that. Time reversal, false presentation of an order of operations, like one ahead. So because it's a prediction and the thing I end up with at the end, in a way, the reason why it's italicized is that in a way there's a time reversal going on, but actually I know the end because I'm forcing it, so I put it in italics there. There are other more legitimate ways to do time reversals when you actually don't know the information at the onset of the trick, and you have to figure it out through the course of the trick and then apply it at the end of the trick. And then the last one here in red is misdirection, the unexpected effect. Again, this is highlighted in red because this is really the major element that's causing the illusion to work, is that the misdirection that is in there is that the actual effect is completely unexpected. You don't know that it's going to happen. And then down here we have a spectator alternative experience, including material substitutions. Again, it's in italics because it may not be totally applicable, but there are some subtle ways in which that is also going on too. So you want to be thorough and really understanding everything that's going on as you develop a trick. And then it's good also, this trick has actually changed from the time that I first conceived of it. As I went through this list and thought about the various available methods, I started to change the trick, and it ended up being slightly different than how I thought about it. It ended up being a lot better. So you want to be able to have a list of concept here that you can go back to in order to think more critically about what you're doing. So with that being said, I will go through the procedures of the trick, and you will see how all of these things are going to play into this very straightforward effect that is actually a transformation, and is being hidden underneath these other kinds of effects here that are really just a distraction.
So very quickly, let me walk you through the different principles that make this very simple effect work. However, this very off-putting effect. If someone was to view this in a parlor kind of situation, I think it would go over fairly well. Of course, watching something back on video would give away this trick probably on the second viewing, but that's not really our concern. We're not making magic specifically for YouTube. We're making magic here that we would show to people perhaps live in some kind of event, maybe a party or some kind of event that you have booked. So this is a very elaborate setup. And we've already talked about the various types of effects, and we've talked about the various methods that make those effects work. We made a list of what kinds of effects we want to occur, and we also chose a few of the options that we have available to us in terms of methodology to make that effect work. So let me just walk you through the various parts here to see how this is going to happen. This is going to be some sort of a a change sort of effect. We're going to transform something. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to have it tiered so that things that we're not expecting to transform are going to transform before the thing that we expect to transform. And what that does is that puts us kind of one ahead on our procedures here in terms of fooling the audience. So the setup very quickly, I have a glass here with a prediction. The prediction is the joker, which is a duplication of the back of the deck that we're working with. Then over here I have a box, which is a bit of a distraction or a sort of a red herring here. But it's actually going to aid us in a way in one of the procedures that we have to do with respect to a switch. But I have this box here with a regular deck of cards inside. Now, we are going to depend on a force for the kicker, and we probably wouldn't have to do that if we didn't want to do a kicker on the end there, but we might as well get one extra effect in the end. So we're going to force our final card so that we can do that kicker and transform our joker at the end. And the way that we're going to accomplish that, and you could do this really by any force, but the force that I have working on here is that there is a breather crimp in here, which is going to hit the 5 of diamonds every time. So I have a 7 of clubs from another deck. This is a fairly new deck, a good deck. So I took a 7 of clubs from an old deck, and I put a pretty deep breather crimp in it so that we would hit that 5 of diamonds essentially every time. You can see on my channel a couple of tutorials related to breather crimps and various kinds of crimps. So that's how we're going to accomplish it, and I think in this setting that looks like a fairly fair kind of selection for one person to do, is to just cut into the deck. It looks fairly reliable, fairly true and authentic, rather than doing some other kind of force. So that is the setup with respect to the deck and the prediction. And then one last piece, actually two more pieces of information, are the switches. We have to switch a deck and we have to switch a card. So the deck is actually sitting partly underneath the box over here, just out of view. And I have a matching order, actually, just for detail, that the stack here relatively matches, especially the bottom few cards, the deck that is in the box. That way there is no discrepancy when we go to make our switch and we fan the cards out. So I have this deck sitting over here out of view. It's not seen underneath the box, and the box kind of gives the impression that you can see through it, even though at the angle of the audience you wouldn't be able to see all the way through to the back. Again, you could switch any other way you want to, but this is the way I'd settled on. And then there's another detail here. I have this glass sitting here on purpose. It kind of obstructs a little bit of the view to the side, so that when I go through the motions of switching out the deck, we don't see very clearly everything that's going on here. It seems random, but the glass is actually there on purpose. The last switch we have is a 5 of diamonds with the proper back on it, and that is sitting in my lap to switch out later on. So here is the procedure. We're going to go to the box. We open up the box. We take out the deck of cards. I explain that it is an ordinary deck. I fan the cards out to show the backs on purpose so that this can be imprinted in the audience's mind and they can see that they are a particular kind of deck. I also showed the box very clearly, too, when I took it out, and that kind of drives home the brand of cards that we're dealing with. I then turn them over to show that they are random and shuffled. There's no duplications there. And then we go to the cut. So I cut the deck to make our selection, which is a force. I have my 5 of diamonds. You may or may not even show the backs one more time just to drive that point home. Now, here comes the first bit of dirty work. In talking about our selection and the fact that it was free, I take the deck with the 8 of clubs, 8 of hearts on the bottom, facing up, and I'm going to do my first switch. I'm going to bring this around, and instead of setting it behind the box with the lid up, I'm going to do a couple motions at once. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to dump this off into my chair. I have an armchair here to catch it, and I'm just going to very smoothly slide it off the end and dump it into my lap. And in that motion, I'm also closing down the box and lifting the box up to move it over. And it makes it appear as though I just moved the deck behind the box, closed the box, moved it over, and here is my deck. So that's my situation. I've dumped off the deck into the chair over here, and I have gotten rid of it. I've gone south with the deck is the term that we use. Now, as I explain my prediction, in this prediction over here, I will casually, in an offbeat, take the deck and bring it back to the forefront, and I would then fan it back out again and give it a good spread on there. And this is going to sit kind of for a while. Now, to the audience, they're not really focused on the deck. They're thinking about my prediction, and they're thinking about this card, and that's what they're looking at. So this is a completely offbeat motion. The prediction is supposed to be about the card. The deck is really out of play at this point. It's just sitting there. Then I would go through the motions of bringing this card down and talking about the face, and I would turn it over, and the fact that it's a joker, which is a wild card, can be any card, and I go through all this rigmarole. Then I talk about the back of the card. Now, in this motion, I'm going to make another switch. And this is also kind of off-putting, too, because the mind of the audience is going to take another turn. They're going to get away from this joker. I turn the card over to talk about the back. And what I've done is that in this talking, I have brought up my 5 of diamonds duplicate, and I have it here in a deep kind of gambler's cup with my hand sitting at the edge of the table as I'm making this discussion about the face of the card and then the back of the card. I turn it over and I set it out in front, and then I turn the joker, and then I sweep the joker towards the back of the table. And what I do is I actually just flick it off the end, and I bring up over the top of my hand the duplicate card, the 5 of diamonds that I'm passing in. And I immediately set it back in the cup, which is where we saw the joker the whole time. So this is really an offbeat moment again. The focus is not on the joker itself, and I'm talking about the back of the cards. So there's an assumption here that the face of the card really doesn't matter anymore, and the focus is more on another kind of issue, which is, again, the back design. At this point, then, I say that not everything is as it seems. I slip in my 5 of diamonds, with the face facing up, and then I can do a turnover of my fan to demonstrate that it is indeed a very different back from the rest of the deck. And of course, this is the switch deck. And then the kicker here at the end is that I say at the very end that, again, not everything is as it seems at first, and that is when I divulge that there is apparently a switch that went on there, and the joker is now a 5 of diamonds, which is a perfect match. So we have multiple phases of an effect going on there using the techniques that we discussed from our list.